Okay, welcome everyone to class. This is the Thursday night class. This is the continuation of the discourse, which I found was, even though I didn't prepare last week at all, and I found the discourse to be so amazing, and everybody that learned it over here, at least with us over here, was like blown away by the power of this discourse, and we're going to continue now. So this is part two. I would recommend everyone to listen to part one before you listen to part two. I'm not going to do much of a review, and I still didn't prepare the class. Okay, so we'll let it happen with God's help. Okay, so the maamar was a discourse from Reb Shmuel, who was the fourth Chabad Rebbe, and this discourse was given in 5633, which is 1873. And it begins out with the famous verse of the month of Elul, Dodi Li. He first juxtaposes the two verses. One is, I am to my beloved is to me. The other one is, my beloved is to me and I am to him. Referring to, as we discussed in the discourse, the two forms of connection to God. One is through us rising up to him and then God reciprocating. And the other one is God first doing his thing first and we respond. And we discussed that these were the two seasons of the year. One is the month of Nissan, going out of Egypt, which was an act of God first. And then we were stimulated, versus the month of Tishrei, which follows the letters backwards, Taf Shin Reish, as opposed to the month of Pesach, which is called Aviv, which follows the order of Aleph Beis. So one is from up down, the other is from down up. How does one connect to God? These two dynamics of the energy. To understand it, he just said we need to understand the difference between the first parsha of the Shema and the second portion of the Shema. In the first portion of the Shema, it mentions Torah study first and then action. Because it says there you should first love God, and then it right away goes into teaching your children and studying, and then it says do the mitzvahs like putting on tefillin and mezuzah and all of that. In the second portion of the Shema, it reverses the order. It speaks first about doing the mitzvahs, and only afterwards it says v'limadetem, you should learn the Torah, teach your children. So what's the idea that there's a reversal of the order? So to understand this, we began to discuss the argument of the sages: which one is greater? Is Torah study greater or mitzvahs are greater? In the end, so they debated this for a long time, the sages. In the end, they came to a conclusion that Torah study is greater because it leads to observance of mitzvahs. So therefore, if you have a certain an hour to do mitzvahs or an hour to study Torah, and the mitzvah is not an obligation to you, for you particularly to do that mitzvah right now. It's not like, for sure, if there's a mitzvah that you need to do right now, you didn't hear shofar yet, Rosh Hashanah, you're going to say, I'm going to go learn. That doesn't work. You have to hear the shofar, or you have to, do your mitzvah. But we're talking about, you have an hour of time. You can either decide to go run some mitzvah errands, or you can learn Torah. Which one should you do? So the sages say, study Torah, because that's going to lead you and inspire you to do many more mitzvahs. Okay, Talmud is greater because it leads to mitzvahs. So to understand, first of all, each initial opinion. Why there were those who said that mitzvahs are greater. What's their reasoning? There were those who said Talmud was greater, and they didn't. And it seems like it wasn't the reason because it leads to mitzvahs. It's because Talmud in its own is greater. But then they came up with a reasoning that everybody can agree on. Maybe even some of the people who believe that mitzvahs are greater can also agree on that Talmud is greater from the perspective that it leads you to do more mitzvahs. So that's like that we need to understand. That's like a third thing. And then we're going to find out in the discourse that in the days of Moshiach, it's going to be clear and experienced that mitzvahs are greater than Talmud. So first of all, we have these two opinions. Then you have currently, we say that the Talmud, the Torah study is greater because it leads to more mitzvahs. But in the time of the redemption, mitzvahs will be greater. And we will not consider the idea that Talmud leads to more mitzvahs. So to understand all of this, what does this mean? So in last week's class, we mainly discussed the opinion that mitzvahs are great. And if you remember, I'm just going to say a point. The main point of doing a mitzvah is you're doing what you don't want to do. And you're pushing yourself beyond your limits. That's the essence of a mitzvah. It's not so much about enjoying it. It's nice if you enjoy a mitzvah, but if that's the case, you got to always push yourself a tiny bit more, so the mitzvah has an element of compelling yourself. Because when you do that, is when you drive the entire cosmic effect of the mitzvah. And what is that? What is that? That is that we know that God has attributes. And the attributes of God, his kindness, his compassion, all of his attributes are the underlying powers that through which he creates the worlds. But God is infinitely above his attributes, and for him to project attributes or to present himself with attributes is a very, very great diminishment of who he is. It's to him the attributes are meaningless. So he has to forgo on his true greatness. He has to humble himself into being great. It's not just that he has attributes. Remember, we said the main attribute is that he can. The big one is his kindness, which is also called his greatness, which is the power to create something from nothing. And it's expressed as his ability that no one else can do. Only God can create from basically. So the entire creation is dependent on God's greatness, that he can create something from nothing. But for God, God has to shrink himself to be tiny and infinitesimally small in his eyes, to reach a point where his greatness is that he can create something from nothing. So to become great, because that's already a certain definition that he is great, that he creates something from nothing. Because that is already a certain definition, and God is essentially definitionless. Forget it. Make believe I said it right. So for him to descend into a definition, even let it be the most spectacular definition, is for him an enormous humility. And we need to coach him to make that move. Which means God has to go against himself, forgo on his true greatness, on his infinite, beyond otherworldly greatness, to come down to what we call in English, we call in Yiddish rather, pachka with this world. Pachka with creating the world. It's it's an insignificant entity. Doing the coolest trick from our end is to him like the greatest performer, doing a silly little trick that any child can do if they want to do a little acrobats or magic or whatever. So to ask God to do that, he's really, really, really dropping his infinite self. So how do we do that? By us humbling our own egos and not doing what we want to do and surrendering ourselves to God. We constantly generate this. So we become co-creators because we drive the entire creation. So, over here in the Science Center, they have this exhibit. I took my grandchildren 2 times to the Science Center because they have these, they have the IMAX, the nature IMAX. So we saw really cool ones. Summer, it's just, so over there outside the California Science Center, they have this strings attached to to a truck. One of those, what kind of truck? One of those, what are they called? The like a tow truck. What kind of truck is that? The ones that have an open back. A regular Land Rover, something like that. The ones that have this, 2 seats in the front and then a big open back. You know what they're called? Those trucks. A pickup truck, a flat truck, or something like that. So they have this regular, and then they have this, it's attached to the pole, and you have these strings, and you can lift the truck up if you pull down on it. So if you try to pull it from very close, you need to be Superman to be able to lift the truck. But the thing goes out far, and the string, so if you pull it at a very great distance, then even kids can come and pull it because of the distance of the pole. Even a little bit pulling on one end lifts the entire truck. Being that we are so infinitely far from God, so when we do the tiniest deleting of our ego, The tiniest movement, when we push, when we put in a tiny bit of effort to overcome our desire, to give a little more charity than we want to give, to do a mitzvah and spend a little bit more money than we want to spend, or to overcome our laziness, or to whatever the mitzvah is, to exert ourselves for God's sake, to be a little more polite than we want to be because someone is going on our nerves or something like that. And we overcome, or we take away from our time, from our things that we want to do and do God's will. So that's like lifting. And with that, we are literally pulling the entire truck, which means we're pulling God to do the same thing. And like I said last week, it's like putting coins. Wait. Who's that? I hope she's not tearing that. So last week we gave the example of like you have to keep on feeding the meter for the vacuum when you do a car wash in those self car washes. Keep on feeding the meter for that vacuum cleaner to work. So that's the thing. Mitzvahs have to continuously being generating and pushing and driving, and that's the only way we actually produce and bring forth and drive the infinite to drop down to the level of greatness to create the world. And this is a little bit of a summary of what we learned last week. And now we're going to learn, and now we're going to begin, and we're going to explain what is the other opinion. Why would there be an opinion? Why would there be an opinion that would say that Talmud is greater? How can Talmud be greater than mitzvahs? So there must be something about the Talmud that is pretty cool as well. Learning. Now learning is a complete different experience. In learning, you're enjoying. Learning is engagement. It's not I mean, some people really don't like to study and learn. For them, learning has the quality of a mitzvah. But the main concept of learning is not that idea. Mitzvah is from the word maaseh. Maaseh comes from the word ma'useh. Ma'useh means a compelled, a forced act. In study, it's supposed to be enjoyable. So it must be that the value of Torah study is not in the compelling. The value of Torah study is different. So let's see what it is. There is another opinion that holds. We're holding Siv Gimel, Perek Gimel, 3rd chapter. Talmud Gadol, the Torah study is greater. The Inyan, and the idea is as follows. Even though the action is greater, through the action and through the compelling, that was the reason also we said, Maaseh Gadol. Action is great. What does it mean it's great? It produces God to be great. In other words, the action of the mitzvah makes God be great, because without your mitzvah, he's infinitely greater than being great, and there is no creation because he's not producing something from nothing. So it's your action that we are doing, that we are making God to be great for the world. So that's awesome. Nevertheless, true. What generates God's greatness, what stimulates that the Ein Sof, the infinite, to lower himself down into his attribute of greatness, to be a power to create the world, is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is the stimulus. That's what the mitzvah is. It's the stimulator. It's what However, once it's stimulated, now you have to be able to catch that light. You need a vessel, a container, to be able to receive it. The container to hold that light, to receive that light, is the Talmud, is the Torah. So the producer of the light is the mitzvah. But the vessel that can hold the light is the Torah. Much more than the mitzvah. And therefore the Torah has a quality that the mitzvah doesn't have. Because in Torah, the infinite light can dwell. The power of God's greatness, the infinity can... Why? As we'll see in a moment. Because Chochmah is a keli for the Ein Sof. Chochmah is the vest. Chochmah is not the wisdom of God. The Torah is God's wisdom. Wisdom is not a trigger, but it's a place where it can rest. The vessel for the Gadol Havayah, for the greatness of Hashem. Because again, God creates the world, and now God wants to dwell in the world. And He needs you to be a dwelling place for Him. How can you become a dwelling place? How can me and you, all of us, be a dwelling? When we study His Torah, He dwells inside of us. Because the Torah originates in Chochmah. The Torah comes from Hashem's Chochmah. And since the Torah comes from God's Chochmah, not only it comes from, the Torah is God's Chochmah. It's just that when it's up there, it's infinite, and then God condenses it and compresses it and contracts it so that it can be understood by the human mind. Fine. But when we're studying it, the Havayah b'Chochmah. Where is the Havayah? Havayah is the name of God's transcendence. Where does He dwell? In Chochmah. Ki or Ein Sof, because the or Ein Sof ein Shira kiyam b'Chochmah. The or Ein Sof only dwells in Chochmah. Why? Because the Ein Sof precludes any other existence. The Ein Sof means He's infinite, and if He's infinite, means there cannot exist anything but Him. So if you want Him to dwell in you, what does that mean? That He can reveal Himself inside your soul. You have to be ready to lose yourself out of existence completely and allow yourself to cancel yourself to the point that you don't exist and it's only Him. And that's the quality of Chochmah. Because Chochmah means Chochmah, the power of what? So over here, it's more than bending your will. Earlier, you see, in a mitzvah, it's the opposite. In the mitzvah, you have to have a lot of self. Because there has to be, in the whole point of the mitzvah is there's a friction. There is an ego. And the beauty of the mitzvah is when you crush the ego, there's a spark that flies. See? The beauty of the mitzvah is there's an ego. There's an I. I don't want to do the mitzvah. I don't want to daven now. I don't want to get. I'm not in the mood. Someone is banging on the door. I don't want to answer the door. And then you crush that ego, and you go ahead and you do it. You release a spark. That spark is what triggers. That gives God a thrill. And God says, you know what? This guy overcame himself. I'm going to overcome myself also. And the But here's something else. Once God's light does come showering down to the world, you have to be able to receive it. How do you... That He can reveal Himself. He can only reveal Himself where there is no ego at all. Because as long as you're feeling I, you're contradicting the fact that He's infinite, because if He's infinite, He is the only reality. So only if you're so subtle and so refined that you don't exist and it's only Him, that's what Chochmah is. Chochmah is that vessel that has no self. So it can receive the infinite light. So not necessarily that when we study, we feel that. You feel yourself completely losing your existence into God, but the Torah itself is made up of the substance of Chochmah. And the truth is, you can't conceive an idea in Torah. It's impossible to conceive an idea of Torah. If you're, what's a Torah? Any idea of Torah means that for the moment you're learning, your mind has to be thinking that idea, not something else. If you're thinking something else, you're not really learning. And so what you are thinking, you're allowing the Torah in your head. And what's the Torah? The Torah is wisdom that's nullified to God, that's accepting God's reality, that God is and there's none but Him. So now you as a human are now in the experience of Chochmah, of Chochmah. In simple words, you're not feeling yourself right now because you're feeling God's ideas. You're tuning into God's channel. God is speaking in your head, not you're speaking in your head. It's God speaking. You're not even saying prayer is where you are saying what you're excited about God. But it's you. In Torah, you're silencing your channel and you're allowing God to talk in your head. Especially if you understand it and you appreciate it. So then God is now completely immersed Himself into your consciousness. And you have dissolved your mind into Him. And that's the Chochmah experience. So that's the vessel. Now God has revealed Himself inside of you. And inside of the person is the infinite. What can be greater than that than you hosting the infinite? When you're doing the mitzvah, you're not hosting the infinite in as much like when you're learning Torah. You're triggering something that's making God really, really excited. And now you can understand why there will be an argument which one is greater. Because in terms of having something, you're having something so much greater when you're studying Torah. You're having God. But in terms of giving God a thrill when you're doing a mitzvah, you're triggering his pleasure. There's nothing that excites him more than the nullification of an ego. When the ego is kicking, not when the ego is not kicking. The thicker, the denser the ego, when it nullifies itself to God, the greater the celebration. And that's the reason why, so that's why action is greater. So that will be the debate, which one is greater. That's what he's saying. And therefore, that's the reason why when the Torah comes down below, one thing is very important when you study Torah. You can't study Torah with self, with ego. The Torah needs to be studied with bittul. Like it says, I put my words into your mouth. God says, I put dvarai, my words, bepicha, in your mouth. That means you're not saying your words, you're saying God's words. And this is what it means, this is what it says, Talmud Gadol. The Torah is great. That's the opinion why Torah is great. And we find it in the human being. Even though the soul is present in all limbs of the body, but where does the soul reveal itself most? In the brain. The revelation of the power of the soul is in the brain, much more than any other limb, much more than any other power. The eye is pretty powerful. The mouth is powerful. Each the limbs are powerful, but nothing like the brain. And Torah is the brain, the vessel. Well, in every limb there is life of the soul. And the power of vision is in the eye. And the power of walking is in the leg. And the power of movement is in the hand. The imk, meaning being able to do more refined movement, like writing things and so forth, and art and whatever. The imk calls it ikar klolos hachayis. But where is the general life force reveal itself? The moach, in the brain. Not only is the moach the seat of the highest faculty, which is the intelligence, but the moach also controls all the other features. It's the control center. And the moach, the brain, is also the attacher that draws the life into all the limbs. Because there are two levels. There is the essence of the soul, and then there is the expansion of the soul. There is the soul itself, and then there is the energy the soul emits. The real substance of the soul only encloses itself in the brain. What flows and invigorates or is assimilated into the rest of the body is only the outer rays of the soul, the outer powers, But the very neshama itself, its only resting place is in the moach, is in the brain. That's why we know how careful one has to be in general spiritually with their brain, what they expose their brain to, but also physically. We know a tiny injury in the brain could be devastating, because that's where you're affecting life in general, not just a particular expression of life. But the expansion of the soul is in all the limbs. The alkane, therefore, who is the one who attaches? Who transitions the essence of the soul to the expansion of the soul, which means all the life of the details of the body, all the particular functions of the body, which are all just particular functions coming from the general life force, it's the brain. And for that reason, that's why I understand what's going on. If you have a pain in one of your 248 limbs, like on your toe, you feel it in your head, dafka. You feel it in your head. The head is very much aware of it. Because it's all connected. Now, just like in a human body, because of what we just discussed, the hand cannot compare to the head. The same is also a mitzvah, which every mitzvah is considered the limbs of God, cannot compare to in this framework, from this perspective, to the Torah, which is the brain. The 248 commandments, which are the 248 limbs. The Torah is the primary vessel, to the light. Just like the brain, is a vessel to the essence of the soul. And that's why the other opinion argued Talmud Gadol, that Torah is greater. Piddish. And what does it mean, Gadol? In Maaseh, action, we said, because action triggers God to be Gadol. And we said earlier, to be great. And why is Torah called Gadol? Piddish Torah is who Hamshachas B'chinas Gadol Havayah. Torah allows, you use the word Hamshacha, draws, but I think it means more, the Torah is the drawing because it's the vessel. The light will not be drawn down unless there is a vessel. And the vessel is the Torah. Okay, so this is reasoning like this and reasoning like that. It's interesting how we spent a huge amount of the maamar to explain action greater. When it comes to Torah greater, he spent only a very small part. But now he says, Nimru v'gamru, then they went to vote, because they had this argument for quite a while. Then they put it up for a vote. They wanted to see who is the opinion, like who holds actions are greater, mitzvahs are greater, and who holds Talmud is great. So when they took finally account in the rabbinic court, in the Beis Din, they counted and they came to they decided that Torah is greater, but for a different reason, not for the reason we said earlier, because the Torah would lead you to more action. We'll see what that means in a minute. Nimnu v'garmu Talmud Gadol Shemei v'Lidei Talmud Shemei v'Lidei Maaseh. The Talmud is great because it leads to action. What does that mean? Kihine mitzad beis hatamim anel. If you were only to evaluate the action versus the Torah study and put one versus the other on the scale, they would be 50-50. Each one is a very powerful quality. Based on that, you could not weigh in on which one is greater. They're kind of, each one has a quality that the other doesn't have, and in that sense, it's precious beyond precious. In Talmud Gadol and Maaseh Gadol, if the Torah is greater or the action is greater, each one have a plus. Each one has a plus that the other one doesn't have. Because in action there is a quality, Shamaisa Gadol, that Maaseh is great, Shamachmes Amaisa Vakfia, because of the action and the kafia and the subduing. Through this, we draw down that God should contract himself, like we discussed earlier. For that, a person has to contract their desire. Ubetalmud yeshmail. And in Torah study, there is a quality. Sha'atoiru ikara keli. Torah is the vessel, l'klolas ha'or, to the general light, to the infinite light. Every mitzvah also has a light. But a mitzvah, see, once mitzvah triggers God, it receives. What does the mitzvah receive? But only a particular manifestation of God, but not the infinite light in general. The mitzvah cannot hold that. Just like a hand can't facilitate that power. A hand can't facilitate the soul. It can only facilitate the power of artistic power of the soul, but not the soul itself. The brain could facilitate the soul. So the alkain iyashalachriya, you can't decide between this. Depends what you're looking at. Both of them are precious in their own way. But they did come to a vote, and they did decide. They took account and they concluded Gadol Talmud matam achar, that the Talmud is great for another reason. Gadol Talmud, that study is great because it leads to action. What does that mean? What will lead a person to action? So he learns this much more than just, well, if you can't do mitzvahs if you don't know what to do. So you have to study Torah, so we'll teach you how to do the mitzvah. Of course that, but it goes deeper than that. So therefore, someone who's going to learn, someone who doesn't learn doesn't even know how many mitzvahs there are and how many opportunities there are to do mitzvahs. But if you learn, and secondly, the learning makes you mindful to notice mitzvahs, because you're learning the subject, so you're constantly in that headspace. So it's going to lead to it, but he's going to say much deeper than that. You see, a mitzvah requires an overpowering of the ego. Now, while the ego is super inflated, not necessarily does the person have the strength to overpower that laziness, that selfishness, that Torah study feeds the soul, gives the soul a lot of nutrition. Torah is called food. So you're building muscle in the soul through a lot of Torah. When you build muscle in the soul has your godly soul. Then the soul has the power to shatter the animal soul. So when you're gonna come to a question whether you're gonna do a mitzvah or not, and you might have just rejected the mitzvah because you don't have the energy to overcome your selfish instinct. You need a robust soul to do that. If you studied Torah yesterday, you're suddenly going to find it within yourself to smash your ego. So the Torah gives you the might to do the mitzvah. And we're going to see soon, Torah affects the mitzvah in two ways. Torah has a unique quality that it strengthens the soul and it drains the ego. The more Torah you study, if you study Torah in the right way, the animal soul gets weaker. That's why the Talmud tells us that anybody who commits to Torah study gets a physical weakness comes over their body. Because why would Torah make a person's body weak? Because the main engine of the body is the animal soul. And when the Torah comes and punctures a hole in the tire of the animal soul, it gets a flat tire. So the animal is not the motor. The animal soul can't motorize so much. It's a little weaker. So it does two things. It strengthens the soul. It empowers the godly side of the person, and it drains the animal. So it weakens the ego, empowers the soul. So you're in a much better position when you meet a mitzvah that requires to overcome your whatever obstacle that's coming from the animal side. To overcome it, because you study Torah, it's gonna enable the mitzvahs to come more easily. And that for that reason, that in other words, no, in terms of Torah and mitzvah itself, the mitzvah might be equal to the Torah. But since Torah has an additional quality, it also weighs in and helps you do mitzvahs. So together with the fact that the Torah is a vessel to God, quality number two, it generates and it empowers a person to be more successful in doing mitzvahs. So for now you have 2 against 1. That's why Torah is greater than mitzvahs. It's a brilliant explanation from the Alt. This explanation the Rebbe Maharash is saying is from the Alter Rebbe, where he explains this idea. Shemi hu amevel de Maaseh, who is the one who brings to action? That a person should be able to bend himself and nullify his will. Who Torah? That's the Torah. Ki Talmud mevel de Maaseh, because Torah study leads to action. To understand the matter. In Eksiv it says Elokim, that God made the 2 great luminaries. It says that God made two great luminaries. And afterwards it says Gadol, the big luminary, Katan, and the small luminary. So it says that God created 2 luminaries, the big one and the small one. For behold. So I guess the question is, initially it calls both luminaries big, and then later in the verse it says 1 big one, 1 small one, which is the sun and the moon. But initially they're big. So we know what the sages tell us. Initially the moon was created like the sun, but then the moon complained that 2 kings you can't have 2 kings, it has to be only 1 king. So God said, okay, so you can make yourself small. You can become the vice president instead of the president. And that's the whole idea of the moon. Okay. But let's see what his explanation is. The sun and the moon. What's the difference between the sun and the moon? A new delivery. That Torah study that you learned gave you the energy to pull away from the class to go do the mitzvah. So you just demonstrated. Because I know it takes a lot to leave the class for a second. It says the big luminary and the small luminary. The Hinei Shemeshu Torah. So the question was, in the beginning of the pasuk says there are 2 large luminaries. And then a moment later it says the large one and the small one. So I mentioned earlier that the sages say that the moon was just as big as the sun, but then she complained, so the moon was reduced. But now that also, the large luminary and the small luminary is the Torah is the large luminary, and mitzvahs are the small luminary. The reason for that is because Torah comes from the masculine side of God. The Chumash originates in Chochmah, but and Chochmah is male and Bina is female. That's number 1. But also because the Chumash, the Torah Shabbat, is Tiferes. Tiferes is the male, because it's part of the 6 emotions, masculine. Mitzvahs are related to the king. The king commands, so it's all part of Malchut, which is a female. And that's why compared to the moon. And that's why the mitzvah is a recipient from the Torah, just like the woman receives from the man. Because how does the mitzvah receive its instructions? The mitzvah needs to look into the Torah to receive all the details of how to do the mitzvah. Right? Torah instructs and informs the mitzvah. Sun and moon. Okay. Like it says, L'shemesh sam oil behem. It says in Psalms, I think it's Psalm 19. To the sun, Hashem placed oil, a tent, behem in them. And then it continues, V'hu kechasan yotzei mechupasa. That the sun is like a groom coming out of his chuppah, coming out of his canopy of his wedding. So, and the moment before that, it says the sun. So you see that the sun and the sun is a groom. And the Torah we know is the groom. Torah is compared to a groom. Like we know, the day of the giving of the Torah is considered our wedding. So for Amru b'yom chasanos is Matan Torah, the day of his wedding, that's the Torah. The Hinei, okay, so to understand this idea, and that, the Hinei Shemesh Umage in Havayah Elokim. We know, so now let's analyze the sun for a moment. Sages tell us that there's a verse that says, the sun and its sheath, or its shield, Havayah Elokim, is Havayah Elokim. Havayah, the Lord, is like the sun and its shield, its protective shield. So what does that mean? We know that God has two names, Havayah. Havayah is pure infinite light. Elokim is already a tzimtzum, a contraction. What blocks and diminishes and hides and screens the light. It's a screen. It's like a filter. In the same way, like we know that we need to filter the sunlight, because the sunlight can be too strong. The ozone layer helps filter the sunlight. And that's why if you're exposed to the sun rays in a place where there's not enough protection, it can, God forbid, damage it, right? So the sun needs a shield. Same way, Havayah is God's infinite light. If God's infinite light would touch us as it is, we would become, God forbid, it would be too much. So there needs to be the power of Elokim that conceals. Fine. Shema Elokim, u'b'chinas magen v'nartek, it's a shield and it's a nartek. Nartek means it's a container. Sheyehelam v'hester, that there should be a concealment. But okay, so there's one element of the name of Elokim. There's one element of Elokim that it's reducing the light just enough for the world to receive, and the world to be able to be a world, time and space to emerge. Shouldn't be canceled in the infinite light. Okay, but the name of Elokim we know has 120 different combinations, because a word with five letters, you can combine it with 20 different combinations. And what God does is that he keeps on creating new filters with the 120 different configurations of the name of Elokim. Every filter filters out even more light and makes it darker and darker. By the time you get to the latter filter, especially the last 48 filters, the God's light becomes so hidden and obscured that evil begins to exist. And all kinds of corruption and all kinds of these things happen. And you end up with a creation that's not necessarily synchronized with God, or at least in a revealed way. And that's because there's a lot of too many Elokims placed over there. Of course, God created that on purposely because he wants us to, like this week's parsha, you go out to war and he enjoys us fighting those forces of darkness and ultimately subduing them. But, okay. So that's what he says over here. The light becomes so obscured and so black until not only is there a world, but even our animal soul, which is not pure, which has all kinds of impure impulses and desires, also receives. Basically, when he says over here animal soul, it's like if he's saying our evil inclination. Also gets energy. From what? Like I said earlier, from the 120 permutations or configurations of the name of Elokim. And this is what it says, Malach Elokim, that God reigns. Which name does it use? Elokim. The name of, not Havayah. Havayah is beyond. But the power of Elokim, what does Elokim do? Elokim obscures the light, diminishes it, weakens it, and hides it, veils it, till it reaches a point that Elokim can reign over, Elokim can reign al goyim, on the nations. Over here on the nations means on that which is not necessarily holy and godly. And it includes the part inside of us that's not Jewish. And that's our robust animal soul that doesn't always comply with God's will. And yet it too receives the vitality from Hashem. The sun, however, but that's only from the name of Elokim. From Havayah, the animal soul cannot receive energy from. Because Havayah will in order to receive from Havayah, you have to be completely nullified to him. Because Havayah there's no concealment. It's godliness on the open. So in general, the chitzonim, the powers of the unholy, cannot receive from Havayah. Therefore, if someone only does mitzvahs and doesn't study Torah, then the person himself is not exposing themselves to Havayah energy. They're remaining within the zone of Elokim, because mitzvahs come from the moon. The moon is the name of Elokim. The moon is like the shield. Because you think about it, the moon, what does the moon do? It takes sunlight and acclimates it to the nighttime. It has to be dark, but you need a little light. So the moon transitions the light of the sun and reflects it on a much weaker scale. So, and when the moon is out, it can be dark, which represents also symbolically, there can be a dark world. Most crimes are done at night, not in the daytime, because nighttime is a time when troublemakers are out, because it's dark. So the moon is the same idea of the shield, all the name of Elokim. So even when you're generating godliness from the name of Elokim, and you're doing a lot of mitzvahs, and you're channeling God's light on yourself from the name of Elokim, it doesn't negate the animal soul, because the animal soul is also able to receive vitality from the name of Elokim. You have to treat, in order to completely knock the animal soul out, you need to go higher than the name of Elokim. You need to, when one accesses the sun directly, not through the shield, so that your godly soul is able to bask in its light. The godly soul takes in those powerful rays. The godly soul doesn't get injured by it. And the animal soul just keeps a distance. Not only that, it gets burnt a little bit. And when it gets burnt a little bit, it behaves a little better. It weakens the animals. And that's the reason why Torah has a much bigger effect on a person, to transform the person in general than mitzvahs do. A mitzvah can pull you in. And the Rebbe taught us to do mitzvahs with Jews, because the mitzvah is like the when you go fishing, what is it? The hook, the bait and the hook. It pulls you in. It hooks a Jew. It pulls him in. But once a Jew comes in, if you want to make progress as a Jew and get closer to God, you have to start learning Torah. Right? Just once in a while, tefillin, it's nice, it's good, but it's not going to transform the person. A transformation is going to come by a person beginning to study Torah. But the name of Havayah is the revelation of Yechudi Allah, of the higher unity. The Alter Rebbe, with this idea, in Likutei Torah I saw today, he said that's the meaning. When you go to fight your animal soul, your Yetzer, it says, you need to go above your enemy. You need to go to a place where your enemy cannot be sustained. You have to go into a place where, on that level, the enemy is powerless. He says that's what Esther did when she approached Achashverosh. It says she said, I got to get into the inner courtyard. And she explains to Mordechai, she said, if I go to the inner courtyard, I'll be killed, because you're not allowed to go to the inner courtyard. Right? She said, how can I go see the king? Everybody knows, every man and woman knows that any person who dares goes into the inner courtyard and wasn't called, could be straight to the gallows. And I wasn't called for 30 days. So the question, the Alter Rebbe, I don't remember learning this question, but I did teach that maamar years ago. But the Alter Rebbe is such a great question. He says, so why does she have to go to the inner courtyard? Go to the outer courtyard, where you're allowed to come to, and one of the boys over there will come over and say, your Majesty, for the queen. I don't know how you say Majesty for a queen. Your Highness? I don't know what you would use in the female term. What can we do for you? And she'd say, go tell the king that I want to see him. And that's it. As you see later in the Megillah, that's what Haman did. When Haman comes to tell King Achashverosh to hang Mordechai on the gallows, at that night when the king had a restless night, that high security was still in force. This was just 2 days later. The high security was still in force. And Achashverosh says, who's in the courtyard? And they told him, Haman, and he said, let him come in. So how did Haman go there? No one is allowed to go. Even the prime minister can't go. No one is allowed to walk there. Even Haman didn't have security clearance in that place. So how did Haman? He went to the outer court. It actually says openly in the verse that he went to the outside court, because that's where you come. So why couldn't Esther go? The answer is that Esther was battling the forces of evil over here. So she figured she knows if she's going to go into the same playing field where she's equal to Haman, she might not win. She needs to go to a place that Haman can't go and she could go. Which means she has to go to the inner courtyard. Spiritually, it means to enter into the zone where all the klipot, all the unholy, cannot receive vitality from there. You have to go to a place where only your godly soul can go. And that's the meaning when you go out to war, you're above your enemy. And then the enemy doesn't stand a chance. So that's what he's saying over here. When you're learning Torah, you're exposing yourself to light that's above the world. And therefore, the klipas and the sitra achra have they can't live off this energy. So when you take such an intense treatment, it weakens them. And because of that, when you learn a lot of Torah, you have a much weaker ego afterwards, a softer ego. And when a mitzvah comes your way and you have to forego your desire and do the mitzvah, you can do the mitzvah much easier. That's why we mean Talmud is great. It leads to mitzvahs. The idea of the Son is the revelation of the higher unity. See, Elokim is the lower unity. The lower unity means there is a creation, but God rules the creation. The higher unity is there's nothing but Him. There's no creation. Everything is God. There's nothing other than Him. The ultimate truth of God. So a godly soul is ready to receive that because a godly soul is of God. An animal soul cannot go there. And this higher unity is revealed in the soul through Torah. And that's the reason why the Torah is also called sun. Sun, good or bad? Is the sun good or bad? Sun is the best thing that ever happened. With the warmth and the lights of the sun and the rays of the sun, there's life. And the sun makes everything grow. Trees need sunlight. And they get photons or whatever they get. I don't know what they get, whatever the scientific terms are. But light gives growth to plants and things. But at the same time, the sun can burn things and destroy things. It's so hot it can do who knows what. Two opposite powers. The shemesh mashcher, the sun makes something black. The shemesh malbin, and the sun makes things white. V'gam shemesh megadel, the sun can make things grow. That from the sweetness of the grains, it's in the blessings to Yosef. That Moshe blesses Yosef. He says from the sweetness of the grains that are exposed to the sun. V'gam and so that you see that the sun enhances plant growth. V'gam shemesh shoref, and the sun can also create big fires. The sun beats down somewhere too much, it creates a fire, and that can burn. And the sages also tell us an interesting thing, that in the future God is going to heat up the world. Global warming, going to get really hot. And God is going to take the sun out of its shield. The righteous are going to be healed from it, and the wicked are going to be burned from it. So you see, there's going to be opposite powers in the sun. To the sun makes black. The sun makes white. The righteous get healed from the sun. All illnesses are going to be healed by the sunlight. The first one who experienced that was Yaakov, after he got a limp on his foot. It says the sun rose and he was completely healed. Hashem brought out the healing power of the sun to heal Yaakov's limp. So this is going to be in the future. But even now, he says, when the sun is still in its sheath, when the sun is still protected, meaning until Moshiach comes, that the sun is still in its case. It's still able to do, burn things and negative things and positive healing. And so the same thing is about the Torah. The Torah makes things grow and Torah destroys things. Everything good inside of us, the Torah develops. All the negative stuff inside of us that need to be pruned, the Torah destroys them. Torah is called sun. The Torah has opposite powers. Like it says in the maamar Parshas Yisro, that the Torah is called Oiz v'Toshia. Oz means strength. Toshia also means salvation, but it also comes from the word tush. Tush means weak. So how can the same Torah be an empowering energy and a weakening energy? How can it be both? So the Alter Rebbe explains, Oz Nefesh Elokis, it's strength to the godly soul, v'toshia l'nefesh bahamis. And as we said earlier, it releases the air, it causes a flat tire in the animal soul. It gets a little, the animal soul doesn't have that same robust energy. Well, it's a hayra tzarich lahavin, echu oiz v'toshia. How can the same thing be a strength and toshia? And the answer is, ki araisa m'chochmah nafkes. Torah comes from Chochmah, which is the higher unity. Which the higher unity is, God is, and there's none but Him. So if you are in that team God, which means your existence is to be included in God. You're ready to receive that. You're ready to play along with that truth. Then the Torah is the best thing for you. But if you want to cordon yourself off and create yourself your own little space and say, I am, run very far from the Torah, because you're going to study Torah, it's going to interfere with that. It's going to interfere with your ability to be able to maintain a self that claims existence other than God. Torah, you expose that to the Torah is going to burn it completely. So, the godly soul, the godly soul comes from Chochmah, from the wisdom. The higher unity. That's why when we say the higher unity, which is Shema is Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, who do we insert there? Shema Yisrael, here Israel. We're talking to our godly soul. Our godly soul is of Havayah. It is of the higher unity. So it prospers through that. It grows through that. But creation can't handle that. Especially a misguided creation. A lowly for sure can't. When you learn Torah is ba'oz. The Torah infuses vitality, strength, the koach and power. But the animal soul, the animal soul's existence begins from the name Elokim and from the lower configurations of the name of Elokim. That it derives its sustenance and power from the 120 combinations of the name Elokim. So the Torah weakens the power of the animal soul, canal. The Inyan Shemesh Havayah, like we said earlier in Shemesh Havayah, the Shemesh Havayah is higher than the Malach Elokim, than the sovereignty or the powers of kingship. And behold, now we'll understand. Now we start Zehu Gadol Talmud Shemevil Lidei Maaseh. Now we'll understand when it says that the Torah is great that brings to action. In addition to the quality that we spoke earlier about Torah, Torah Ikara Keli, Torah is the main vessel. Or Torah acts like the brain that is able to facilitate and receive the great light, the B'chinas Gadol Havayah of Gadol Havayah. From this reason, you still cannot decide that Talmud is greater. Because there's also a quality in action. Through the action and the subduing. Remember we said how powerful action is. Action is the trigger. Because you're going against your will, you're crushing yourself. Boom, you create that you pull God down. It's amazing. So each one has a quality. So they needed to find another quality. Can any of you, when you go up one against each other, Torah or mitzvahs, they cancel each other out because each one has a quality. Does anyone have anything else to present? And the Torah says, yeah. The Torah has another quality, is that it will lead you to do more mitzvahs because it drains the animal soul and it empowers the godly soul. So they came to this conclusion. There's another quality in Torah. It leads to action. You can come to a state of bittul. The Torah is called strength and weakening. Nefesh Elokis, it's strength to the godly soul. And it's weakening to the animal soul. And therefore, it's easier for a person to come to a nullification of will, and to subdue one's desire. Maaseh, that's an action. So now we'll understand why in the first parsha of Shema it puts Torah first and then mitzvahs. Why? Because who won the contest? Bottom line, Torah wins the contest. So therefore, Torah is put first, because Torah will lead to action and Torah is greater. This is the idea of the first parsha of Shema. Shema Yisrael v'ahavta. It says, Hear, O Israel, v'ahavta, you should love God. And then it says, you should speak in them, right? And then it says, you should bond it on your hand, which is a mitzvah. So first, of course, needs to be, you first have to Shema. First, you have to bond with God. The first thing is, like we discussed last week in the discourse, you have to evoke within yourself a complete desire to be in a relationship with God. That happens when you say the Shema and you say V'ahavta. Now that you desire God, now how do you implement it? So first, the Torah is the vessel to receive, and then the mitzvahs, and then the Torah will also lead you to do more mitzvahs, like we said. This is the idea of V'ahavta, Shorish Ava. And afterwards, you will speak in them, Shemamshich and B'Torah, you draw that godly light down into the Torah. And afterwards, then you will bind them to your hand. You'll bind onto your arm and onto your head. Maaseh mitzvah, which is the act of the mitzvah. And even though the Torah, in the portion of the Shema, it only mentions one mitzvah, tefillin, but in a sense, he says, the sages tell us that tefillin, the entire Torah is compared to tefillin. And the sages derive it from a verse, that the entire Torah is compared to tefillin. Why? But the Alter Rebbe explains why. Why is tefillin such an important mitzvah that all of the Torah is compared to tefillin? Ki tefillin koisvem echad al klav gashmi. Because there's a certain symbolism in tefillin, a certain characteristic in tefillin that characterizes the main objective of all the mitzvahs. So the main objective of all of mitzvahs is to ultimately reveal God in this world. In every mitzvah, you're subduing a part of the world to God's truth. In tefillin, it's the most pronounced. Because in tefillin, you're writing what? You're writing God's unity, and you're writing it in an animal hide, which represents, you're taking the most animalistic thing, and on it, you're actually inscribing the unity of God. Well, that's every mitzvah. In every mitzvah, you don't realize that that's what the mitzvah is. And a mitzvah is to express the divine in all physical manner. But the tefillin is actually, so that's why the tefillin is the prototype. This is what you're going to show. This is the example. It's not just it's the sample. You need a sample of what mitzvahs are. Tefillin is the sample. That's why the Torah lists in Shema one mitzvah, but it's really representing all the mitzvahs. Also, yeah. And so too with all the mitzvahs. V'al came b'parsha Rishayna, and that's the reason why in the first parsha, Haseder Tchila, the order is Torah, first Torah, Achkach mitzvahs, and afterwards mitzvahs. Ki Gadol Talmud Shema Lidei Maaseh. Because Torah is great, because it leads to action, as we said. Torah has two qualities versus mitzvah has only one quality. So the Torah comes before the mitzvah. So then why in the next Torah portion? In Parshas Vahayam Shemaya, it's the reverse. Mitzvahs first. So the Alter Rebbe says, Gewalt. Parshas Vahayam Shemaya is mainly referring to when Mashiach arrives. Now when Mashiach will arrive, egos won't be a problem anymore. The ego will not have to have laser beams to weaken it, because everything will be rectified already. So then the quality of Torah that it leads to mitzvahs becomes a useless quality because you don't need it. Then you're just up one against the other, which one is greater, Torah and mitzvahs, without the second quality of Torah. So even though Torah is a super quality, as he's going to explain, it's the vessel, it's like the brain. And mitzvahs is the trigger, but mitzvahs has the quality of triggering the Ein Sof. Action has the quality, the trigger is higher than the vessel. So then the mitzvahs will be greater. The only question you have to ask is, if you're not going to have ego in the mitzvah, so then the whole beauty of the mitzvah is that you're overcoming the desire, and that's the trigger. But once the mitzvah, so let's see if he goes into that. Now, what is the relationship of the second portion of the Shema with Mashiach? Where do you see Mashiach? So he's going to explain, interesting, that in the second portion of the Shema, you have a couple of verses that describe exile. Because God says, I will get angry at you. If you don't listen to my mitzvahs, you will ignite my anger again, and I'm going to hold back rain, which basically means God is going to turn his back to us and going to send us to exile. Oh, and it says more. It says explicitly so. Va'avadetem mehera. You're going to get lost very quickly, ma'ala aretz hatova, from the good land. That means you're going to be banished from the land. And then after it speaks about that, it tells us to keep the mitzvahs. So what is that referring to? That's referring to after we come back to the land. So the end of the parsha is the coming of Mashiach after we're doing mitzvahs already after the exile. So that's why it refers to the future time. And in that time, mitzvahs are greater. So let's see how he develops it. Well, in the second portion, it says first mitzvah. You will bind them, and afterwards you will study. It says the opposite order. The inyan and the idea is ki parsha sheni, the second parsha shniya, the second parsha. Romez Allah asad lavai is indicating on the future. Why? Shemerum is bar churban beis hamikdash, because it's hinting to the destruction of the temple. As we said earlier, v'chara af Hashem b'chem, that the wrath of God will be ignited against you. And then afterwards, it goes back and it says, you'll put my words on your heart. What does that mean? You'll do tshuva. The end of it. So even though it doesn't say explicitly that this is referring to the coming of Mashiach, this is what it means. You will take my words to heart. This is a promise in the Shema every day. We never realize it. We are actually stating God's promise when we say v'samtem, that we will take it to heart. It's the promise that God says that eventually we will start taking him seriously. We will start keeping mitzvahs. Shemuvtachem Yisrael, that the Jewish people are assured, they are guaranteed, shasoif kol soif yiyeh muchrach, that at the very end, yiyeh muchrach kol echad ve'echad lasas tshuva. Every single person is going to have to find their way back to God. Every single person will have to do tshuva. Like it says in Parshas Nitzavim that we're going to learn in a few weeks, 2 weeks. Batzar lecha, when you'll be in pain. And all these troublesome things will find you, will occur, God forbid, will occur to you. It says over there, V'shafta ad Hashem Elokecha, you will do tshuva. Tshuva is it's not a question. The Jewish people will return to God. And the Rebbe said we did it already, so I like that. So then Moshiach will be here. Then the actions of mitzvahs will be higher than Torah. Because then Talmud, we won't need any more the greatness of Talmud. Shema that will lead to action. The idea that the Torah is called strength and a weakening. That it weakens the power of the animal soul. Why? Because then the spirit of impurity God will remove from the earth. The and the Sahara, the evil inclination, will be uprooted from the world. Like it says openly in a verse, V'hasiroisi, I will yank, I will remove, Eslev leva even, the stone heart, mipsarchem, from your flesh. So we won't have any more a stone heart. V'nisharak, so then what are you left with? We don't need any more treatments for our animal soul. V'nisharak etzem inyan Talmud amaisa. So now you're left with what? Just the general idea of action versus Talmud. Now, okay. In essence, action is greater than Talmud. Why? Ki hamaisa hu ratzon. Because action is God's will. Torah is not God's will. Torah is God's wisdom. There's no will in Torah. Torah is, God is sharing with you his intelligence, how he sees things. Right? I'm going to say, well, when you're reading the Torah, when you're reading the mitzvahs in the Torah, you're hearing God's will, but that's the mitzvah in the Torah. Torah itself is God's logic. Hashem's wisdom. Mitzvahs are his will. And we know between the power of the soul of wisdom and will is deeper in the soul. Will is the soul itself. Wisdom is the first power, is the first of the soul's powers, but it's a particular power. It's not the soul itself. Will is the... So since mitzvahs are channels of God's will, and they are, therefore the mitzvah is superior to Torah. Ki ha'maisu hu ratzon is will, va'Torah b'chenes Chochmah. V'ratzon gavo ma'Chochmah, and will is higher than wisdom. But we don't understand over here, which I'm troubled by. So if you're going to say this, that mitzvahs are greater because will is greater than Chochmah, then why didn't we say this earlier when we initially debated the two? And he said the quality then is that each one has a quality. Mitzvah triggers, and now only when we removed the other thing that Torah had, when we then that goes off, that becomes irrelevant, and we're left with Torah and mitzvahs, which we till now thought were equal. We're suddenly re-examining it and saying mitzvahs are greater because they're the will. So then why didn't you say that at the beginning when you said, no, you can't? He said earlier that maybe the mitzvah being the will itself is something that will characterize the mitzvahs in the days of Moshiach. That means like this. Of course, the mitzvahs are God's will now also. There's no change in the will. It's just that element of the mitzvah. Now what's most seen in the mitzvah is the subduing of self. Then what's most going to be felt in the mitzvah mostly, it's God's will. It's the will of God, which means he and his will are one. So maybe that element of the mitzvah, now we don't feel so much. It's more like a commandment that I need to do. And what we feel more in the mitzvah is the struggle. Because there's still darkness. But maybe Dafke in Moshiach will be highlighted, the source of the mitzvah. In other words, put it this way. It says mitzvahs are in Malchut, but the root of the mitzvahs are in Keter, in the crown. The way we experience mitzvahs today is the Malchut of the mitzvah. The king is commanding. It's not so much, okay, this is the inner will of the king. We don't know the king. We just know that it's a commandment. We're following the commandments. So what's precious over here? The struggle that you're doing. But in the days of Mashiach, we're going to look at the mitzvah from its source. And what's the source of the mitzvah? The infinite will of God. And that's going to shine. And therefore, when that's on display, mitzvahs are greater than that. That's the way I understand it. And that's the reason we say also, in the days of Mashiach, the moon will be like the sun, which means the malchut, and not only that, she will rise higher than the sun, which means which mitzvahs will rise into keter. The moon, which is malchus, will rise into the crown. And the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. The Torah is called the sun, or canals, as we said earlier. And the mitzvahs are called moon. Now the moon receives from the sun, which is the idea that Talmud is great, that it brings to action. Which isn't going to be the case in the future. See, now the moon, the very idea that the moon receives from the sun is reflecting the idea that in order to do the mitzvah, you need sunlight. Like the moon can only give her light, can only shine through the sun. So it's the same idea. You can't really get your mitzvahs going in a serious way unless you learn Torah. Because we discussed earlier, currently. In the future, the action of mitzvahs will be higher. And therefore, the light of the moon will be like the sun. And not only that, but even higher. Like it says, it will be on that day, living waters will go out from Jerusalem. And they will go, half of the water, Elayama Kadmoini will go to the eastern river, eastern sea, or the ancient sea. So what does that mean? It's a prophecy, I think, in Ezekiel. That's referring to, maybe in Zechariah. I don't think it's in Yeshaya, but it's in one. Where over there it says that on that day water will suddenly come forth from the Temple Mount, actually from the Holy of Holies. Water will come and it will go out like a stream, and part of it will run to the east, to the Yama Kadmoni, to the eastern sea. So what does that mean spiritually? Very gewalt. Jerusalem is Malchus. Yerushalayim, Kabbalistically, is the city of God. It's the city of his kingship. So Yerushalayim is kingship, is Malchus. Malchus is the recipient from all the sphere out. It's the woman. She's receiving. She's not giving. Who's the big giver? Who gives all the light to all? Who's the main distributor? Who's the one who showers all the light to all the spherot? Chochmah. Chochmah is called Yam HaKadmoni, the original sea. So now, currently, the water goes from the Yam HaKadmoni, from Chochmah, and it goes through all the Sephirot till it gets to Jerusalem, and it gives water to Jerusalem as well. In the days of Mashiach, the opposite is going to happen. Jerusalem, which is Malchut, is going to be uploading water, is going to be pumping water up to Chochmah. That means the inspiration in Chochmah is going to be coming from Malchus, not the opposite. In other words, mitzvahs are going to make the Torah brighter. Not the Torah is going to make the mitzvahs brighter. The opposite. These living waters are the sparks of holiness that we've elevated through the actions. And these sparks that are going to be uploaded are going to go so high, they're going to go even higher, even higher than Chochmah. Torah, which is Torah. Now, why is Torah called Yam HaKadmoni? because the Torah is referred to as Mashal HaKadmoni, the ancient parable, coming from the Kadmon, primordial. Until the waters will go out, El Hayama Kadmoni, to the ancient river. With this, will understand Inyan Psukim. Well, this will understand the idea of the Psukim, Ksiv Dodi Li. Remember, we spoke earlier. My beloved is to me, and I am to him. This is what was by Pesach. God came first to us, and then, and in the year itself, it's the time of Nissan when God activates things, and then there is Tishrei, which is Ani Dodi Li. The answer is so why? Because the order that Torah comes before mitzvahs is a masculine order. It's male delivering the lights to us. We're the female in this sense. It's God being the male influencing. Torah is God in the mitzvah. Think about it. What's the difference between Torah and mitzvahs? Torah is God talking. You're just listening in. You're just a recipient. You're just hearing the Torah. It's of course you have to understand it, but the point over here is the whole idea of a mitzvah is God's commanding you to do something. Until you don't do it, there's no mitzvah. You have to do it. Torah is Torah. The Torah is a Torah. Torah is, divine channel. It's God's. I don't know. I don't want to even compare it to any television channel, but think about that. It's God's channel. You can turn it on or turn it off, but you're not making it. You're just a recipient of it. Mitzvahs are commandments to us. So mitzvah is much more ani ledodi. I am to my beloved is mitzvah. Torah is Dodi Li, my beloved is to me. So the Dodi Li v'ani the Nissan order, the order of Chodesh HaAviv, Aleph Beis, it's coming from up down. God's coming from us. That's the order of the current times. Current time, when we say current, I don't mean now, I mean all of history till now. It was all coming from God to us. And then after God delivered to us, we responded with the mitzvah. But at a certain point, the whole thing flips over. And the order becomes the opposite. Mitzvahs first and then Torah. That's the way it comes after we do tshuva. After. And that's why that's the order of Tishrei, which comes after Tammuz and Av. Tammuz and Av is the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. It's the same like in V'hayim Shemoah, where there is God will get angry and then you'll be banished from the land. So yearly we go through this process. We start with Nissan, the original situation. The way it was in the past. God does first, the sun is greater than the moon. It's that order. Then we mess up in a little bit in the middle, Tammuz and Av, summer break. Right? And there is, the sin of the golden calf, the breaking of the luchot, the whole thing gets thrown into limbo. But then we do tshuva, and we begin the month of Elul, and then we come to the month of Tishrei, and suddenly the whole reverse order. It's ani ledodi v'dodi li, and the action becomes superior to the study. And because that's the futuristic. Tishrei is the future. Pesach is the past. That's what he's explaining. It's the difference between Parsha Rishayna the Kriya Shema la Parsha Shniya. The first Parsha of Shema is Dodi Li v'ani lo. My beloved to me and I am to him. Ki Dodi Li, my beloved is to me, Kayal Matan Torah, is referring to the giving of the Torah. Shebenun Aleph Yom, in 51 days, Zachu, they merited Lavai, to reach a point, Mibchenas Mitzrayim. They were in such a lowly state. They came from Egypt, Shu Ervas Haaretz, which is such a corrupted, dark place. It's called the filth of the land. And they were elevated lemadrega gavoa kezu. They were elevated to such a high level, panim el panim, dibra Havayah mochem. The Eibishter spoke to them face to face. God spoke to them face to face. How is that even possible? 51 days to come from the lowest state of depravity, and to be elevated to such incredible prophetic experience. It wasn't us. It was Hashem lifting us. This was all powered from above. God, the King of all kings, appeared upon them, revealed himself upon them, and he lifted us up. Dodi Li, my beloved is to me. And once God did that, he gave us the Torah, he elevated. Then begins the process of us responding, doing mitzvahs like we did. It's like God came down and taught us a little Torah. By doing that, he weakened our animal soul. Same process of Torah study. What does Torah do? It weakens the animal and it strengthens the soul. There was no greater strengthening to our godly soul like standing at Hot Sinai. And there was no ever weakening of the ego like standing at Sinai. So it was mamish the process of first Talmud and then Gadol Talmud, Shema Lidei Maaseh. It leads to action. What's the action? The action is the mitzvahs we do for the next 3,000 years. It's all triggered by the giving of the Torah by Ani Dodi Li. Shua Bittul Torah. That's already working things out from the bottom up. He Gadol Talmud, because Talmud is great. Shema Lidei Maaseh brings to action. But afterwards he says, Ani Dodi Li, I am to my beloved is to me. Ki Ani Dodi Li, Rosh Tevis Elul. That's already the month of Elul. So what does that mean? It's the reverse order. Nissan and Elul. First 3 months are pretty good. Nissan, ER, Sivan. We get the Torah. Tammuz and Av is where things break. Right? Tammuz va'av. Shamchur Beis HaMikdash was the destruction of the temple. Chur Beis HaMikdash and the destruction of the temple. Humachmas Bittul Torah. Why was the temple destroyed? Because they didn't study Torah. Like it says, it's because the sages tell us that God would have forgone on the biggest sins. That's not what got him upset. God would have overlooked them. What overlooked them was that the Jewish people abandoned the Torah. Of the Aretz. Why was the earth? Why? Because God lost. Why? Why is this true? Because it's a lost case. If you're not studying, then how are you ever going to overcome your Yetzer Hara? So when God saw, as long as we're studying Torah, God had hope that the Torah is going to do what? The Torah is going to turn us around. So even if you sin from time to time, you do this and this, but eventually the Torah is going to weaken you. That's why God says, even when you're sinning, just keep on learning my Torah. Don't worry, it's going to catch up with you. You might not see the effects of it right away. It will catch up to you. But when they stop learning Torah, because here's the thing, the whole first temple, the entire experience was very Torah-based. Until the destruction of the temple and the exile, the entire dynamic was working as Dodi Li Vanilo. God is to me and I am to him. And how is God to me? Through giving us the Torah. We're not witnessing now the going out of Egypt every day in a physical sense. We're not experiencing those miracles. So how do we activate Dodi Li, that God is to me? Through our Torah study daily. That's how God projects himself onto us. But once they messed on that, they lost the whole thing. So God said, okay, now you're gonna have to reverse the order. It's gonna have to be you first. You have to establish a whole new dynamic, which is Moshiach's time, which is going to be Ani Dodi Li Elul. Because they forsake the Torah. Because Hashem forgave or would have looked over on idolatry, and adultery, and the spilling of blood, which were the 3 cardinal sins. God did not forgo or did not overlook the fact that they didn't study Torah. The Inyan, and the idea is, Keni Amar Azal, the sages say, Titus, who destroyed the temple, may his name be blotted out. Gider esa paroches. We know that in order to show he was so arrogant, and to show that he was victorious over the God of Israel, he took his spear or his sword, and he stuck it into the paroches, into the curtains that separated between the holy and the holy of holies. And when he did that, blood came out, and he therefore bragged that he kind of destroyed the God of Israel. The yatzim and adam, and blood came out. The tzarich law, we need to understand the eizing and heros lo. Why did they show this to him? Obviously, it was a miracle. Why would God show Titus something so vile? It's not true. He's not, God forbid. So why is God showing it to him? Just to, you can say he wanted to fool him, that he should think. But why? Why perform a miracle for that? What's the point? The Inyan, and the idea is, Hashem wanted to show him the reason of the destruction of the temple. For who? And that is, the 248 commandments, they are the limbs. But what's the inner life of the limbs? If you have to say, what's an equal in all limbs? There's one thing that's the inner life of the limbs. That's the blood. The blood circulates in all limbs. The Torah is the blood. The mitzvahs are the limbs, and the Torah is the life force. Because they didn't study Torah, which means they neglected the blood, so he spilled the blood, which means there's no blood there. There's no more blood running through the limbs. And that's why the temple was destroyed. The 248 limbs of the king. And just like in the limb of a person, it's enclosed in it. The light and the life force, Bahadam, and the blood. Nefesh, which is the soul. Now, in addition to the blood being the vessel, it's interesting. Earlier, we compared the Torah to the brain. Now he's comparing the Torah to the blood. And it's very... Why? Because earlier he was speaking about the first quality of Talmud, that it's a vessel to the soul. And for that, much greater than all the other limbs that are just the external part of the soul. That's why he spoke about the brain. But now he's speaking about the second quality, that it enlivens all the mitzvahs. That the Torah is a Talmud Lidei Maaseh, brings to action. So that's not the quality of the brain. That's the quality of the blood. The blood circulates and gives life to all the limbs. Everything is perfect over here. But even more than that, another thing that the arteries do, that happens in the blood runs through the arteries, is that it protects the life, that it should not go into anything else. God doesn't need blood to enliven the body. He could just enliven the body without blood. The soul could have God could have come. The function of the blood is to keep the energy locked in, and it should flow. It should flow and therefore flows in a very protected zone. That's why we know that the moment blood spills out from the artery, then it starts getting an infection, which is bacteria, which means living organisms that are not good start living off that energy. So the blood keeps it in the right spot. But all of this only happens if the limbs are whole and complete, healthy. If God forbid you get a cut, the blood goes outside, which means it runs into where it shouldn't. The 248 commandments, these are the 248 limbs of the king. Shem Kalim, these are the vessels in which the divine flow flows to the universe. V'gam, and there Hem Shmira, and also as long as we're doing mitzvahs, and studying Torah, what's happening? The blood flow, which means the divine cosmic flow into the universe, is flowing, is empowering holiness, and it's not leaking and giving power to that which is evil in the world. There are protection, that the light should not go and alive in the other space. There should be a deriving of the chitzonim, of the dark forces. But all of this is only if a person did not blemish in a sin. But if a person blemished through not doing a mitzvah, and for sure if a person violates a prohibitive commandment, so that's like puncturing or cutting a limb. It's like you got a cut. And this causes a blemish and a diminishment in the organs of the king. It means in the cosmic organs of God, there is a blemish. And this is the meaning when it says those. Thank you. Third. So what is he saying? So that as long as you keep the limbs healthy, which means you keep your mitzvah observance healthy, godly flow is flowing to the world, and it's flowing to holiness, and there's a tremendous influx of godly energy blessing all good parts of the world, everything good and holy in the world. Once we stop messing with the mitzvot, we're lacking in the limbs, or even worse than that, one violates a prohibitive command, which means slashing one of the arteries, one of the blood vessels, the blood leaks out. And then what happens? Guys like Titus get power. And Roman savages start controlling the world. And evil starts to become invigorated, empowered, and you get exiled. And the impossible happens. That in God's world, there is so much pain and suffering and so much atrocity, all because of this. And that's what they were showing Titus, that the blood is leaking. Yeah. That's why the temple, and that's because the Jewish people did not keep the mitzvahs the way they should. Yeah. Those who sin in me. The goof of the malka in the body of the king. And this gives energy to the wrong side. And this itself has many levels. And just like in a person, there are outer limbs where an injury is not so devastating. Even though the blood goes out, if you cut it, a person can still live. But then there are more sensitive organs inside. If they get a tiny little hole, God forbid, a hole in the lungs or a hole in whatever, God forbid. Or the brain, if the membrane of the brain gets a hole in it, forget about it. That's like the pint of blood or revius of blood that the soul is dependent on it. If you, God forbid, cut into something so sensitive, you can't live anymore. The same is also above. God was able to forgo on idolatry, adultery, and spilling of blood, even though they are very serious sins. But this would not have destroyed the temple yet. And you could have kind of, kept God to extend his anger. Vitur means that it's not that he doesn't care. It's just that he's willing to cut some slack and wait a little longer, give more time. God would have delayed his wrath. But when was God not able to relate? When is it an emergency? If you puncture an inside limb. Torah is the internal organ. It's the inside of everything. It doesn't mean that God viter legamri, that God completely doesn't care if we did the sin. Sages tell us that anybody who says that God overlooks, Yevatru chayav, let his life be overlooked. Very serious. So how can the sages themselves turn around and say God overlooked? It's not that he doesn't care. It's just that he's more patient with it. But on Bittul Torah, God, on the lack of Torah study, there was an immediate reaction. Why? Since Torah is the main vessel, the klal to the general light. The Gadol Maaseh, and Torah is also the blood, the main artery that brings the blood to all the limbs. How can in Pagmo B'Torah, if they blemished in the Torah, Chas v'Shalom, God cannot look away anymore. And this caused the destruction to be the temple to be destroyed. And that's why they showed Titus, that he punctured the paroches, the partition, the curtain, that blood came out. This is an indication on the destruction of the temple. From the non-study, because the parochas itself is the idea of the Torah, and he doesn't explain why. I don't know. The curtain, the heru, and they showed that the pagam, the blemish was because of the Torah. The blood came leaking from the parochas. I'm trying to think, why is the parochas the idea of Torah? Hanging partition. I don't know. Now, so how do you fix this? You fix it through tshuva, through repentance. Like it says, Havayah. If the divine energy that is flowing in the universe became drained and leaked into the wrong place, and now there's no life, and God withdraws, the infinite withdraws, because there's no vessel. He's not going to continue pumping his energy in just that it should get usurped by the klipa, by the unholy. So God withdraws. So you need to draw him back and refix all the piping. You have to do a really good repiping and a rewiring and fix all the blemishes. So tshuva can do that. You kind of refurbish the entire system. But that has to come from a very deep place. Because God has already withdrawn, and you have to pull him back from it. To pull him from a place higher than where the blemish happened. Higher than the organs and the limbs of the king. Because over there's a blemish already. You have to go to the essence. And that's the essence of the soul crying for the essence of God. That's what tshuva is. And that process, the process of ani l'dodi. And once that's activated, it's a reverse order. It's going to be first mitzvah, and then Torah. That's already futuristic. Because once you're tshuva, then removes all the impurities of the world, and we don't need any more the Torah to inspire the mitzvah. Then the real quality of the mitzvah is revealed, and so forth. From the depth I call out to you. So what does that mean? It says in the pasuk, you will be only above. It's a pasuk in Kisavo, next week's Torah portion. In the blessings, it says, you will be only above and you won't be below. Isa Barab is Pashas Miketz. It says in Midrash Rabbah, Pashas Miketz, Yochel Kameini, you would think like me. It says you will be above, maybe you'll be like God. Talmud Loimer Rak. You'll be Rak Lamaila. Rak can mean only above, never below. But Rak also comes to minimize. You'll be above, but not like me. My greatness will be greater than yours. And where do we learn it from? Pharaoh did the same thing with Yosef. What did he tell Yosef? I'm making you great, but my throne will be bigger than yours. So the Medrash is saying that God says to the Jewish people, even though you'll be great, I'm higher. The throne is great. Ein Sof Barabbas. The Inyanu. But watch what the Rebbe is going to do. Watch what the Baal Shem Tov does. Watch what Chassidus does. Chassidus says, yeah. When is God greater than us? He says, my greatness is greater than yours. That's when you're still in the mode of Talmud Gadol. Talmud is greater. Talmud is greater. Then, since how are we getting our greatness? The moon is receiving its greatness from the sun. So even when the moon is high, the sun is always higher. The husband is higher than, because I gave you the greatness. Ani Dodi and then Dodi Li. So since it's coming from me, I'm greater than you. But he's going to say, no. When Moshiach comes and the moon will rise, God will say, you're greater than me. This whole idea that my greatness is greater than your greatness is only today. In Moshiach's times, flips up. That's why we don't realize. We don't even begin to realize how powerful we are. And how much today's days we can dictate to God how things should be. And we shouldn't accept anything that is if we're receiving any, we should say, no, we don't agree, Hashem. You have to do it differently. It's okay. Because Hashem is already submitting to his wife. He's finally surrendering to his wife and saying, you're greater. And he has to listen. He tried to his masculinity for a while, and now he's realizing that it's a lost case. And he wants us to be the dominant ones, as we're going to see. Yeah. The Inyanu, ki gedulatchem, your greatness, who Inyan Talmud Gadol, is the idea that the Talmud is great. Or Maaseh Gadol, or action is great. What's both of them? Either the Talmud is great or the Mitzvos are great, but that whole system is it's the greatness is you're drawing down the Sovev light, the infinite light into the universe, into the maamar. My greatness being greater than yours. Ein Sof. That's when God says I'm greater, means I'm greater than what you can download through Torah and Mitzvot. Both Torah and Mitzvot you're downloading, but you're downloading only from a certain level, and I'm greater than that. The essence of the Ein Sof is greater. This we can't draw down through Torah Mitzvot. However, through tshuva, we do. And we access God himself. My greatness is greater than your greatness. It's greater than what you can draw through Torah and Mitzvahs. And how do you get to Gidulasim, God's true greatness, where he's greater than your greatness? That's through tshuva. Because tshuva is so great, it reaches to the throne. What did Paro say to Yosef? Everything you can have, but not my throne. And we learn out the same from God. He says, you can have everything, but not my throne. But it says tshuva is great, it reaches till the throne. And we can even hop onto the throne. The throne of glory, that's the Holy of Holies. Because mitzvahs are also kedusha, but mitzvahs is one-time kedusha. Asher kedishanu, holy. But then there is the Holy of Holies, which is higher than the mitzvahs. It's God's holiness that's higher than the holiness of mitzvahs. My throne is greater than you. Because the four hands are for you. That's Yosef said that to the people when he taxed them. He said, you can keep four. Everybody in Egypt can keep four portions of. When they didn't have any food anymore, they went and they sold themselves to Pharaoh as slaves. And Yosef fed them. He bought everybody for Pharaoh. So what did he say to them? He said, in your crops, you can keep 80% to you, 20% you got to give to the king. It was a tax, 20% tax. And that's the way from then on in Egypt, that's the way it was. Everybody had to give 20% of their to Paro. Spiritually, what does that mean? It means 4 is yours, is God's name. Yud, K, Vav, K. That's yours. That you can download. What's beyond the 4 letters, the 5th, which is higher than that, which is what the point on top of the Yud is indicating, the infinite, you can't download that to the mitzvahs, because the mitzvahs are part of Yud. In every mitzvah it says, Ani Havayah, Yud, K, Vav, K. That you can only reach through tshuva. You can go beyond the name Havayah. You reach the 5th level. And what are these 4? The 4, and he uses the term 4 hands are going to be to you. Doesn't say 80%. He says 4 hands for you, but the 5th is the Pharaoh. What is the hands? That's referring to Hashem's 4 hands. Yad HaGdula, his great hand. Yad HaChazaka, his mighty hand. Yad HaRama, his exalted hands. And it's funny, he only lists 3, because I only heard of 3. He doesn't say what the 4th one is. Shazeh inyan dalet oisiyos to Shem Havayah. Oh, so in the bottom he clarifies. He says that the 4 hands are Yad, Taka says only 4 times. 3 times. Yad HaGdula, Yad HaChazaka, Yad Rama. It says the Jewish people are going out by Yad Rama. But then there's also something in the Torah called Zroa HaNatuya, his outstretched arm. That's the 4th hand. Even though it's not called Yad, but it's the same idea of a hand. Okay, so these are the 4 hands, and which correspond to the 4 letters of God's name. The 4 letters of God's name. But the 5th one is to Paro. What is that? This is the level of Atik Yom, in Ancient of Days, completely above the 4 letters. And over there's no left hand. What does that mean? It's only right, it's only infinite kindness. And this is only drawn through tshuva. Dafka. Like it says, where do you see that? He's deriving it all from the story of Paro as Yosef. When you're reading it not as a human story, but as a divine story, that Paro is referring to the Ancient of Days. So it says, Yosef tells the people, there's a level you can't, even to Yosef, Paro said, there's a level you can't reach, not my throne. There's one thing that it says reached Paro. It says when Yosef revealed himself to the brothers, there was so much, there was such a crying, and there was such loud noise, and there was such a shock. And then when other people found, everybody was screaming, it says the sound reached the house of Paro. V'hakol nishma beis Paro. What's that sound? That's the sound of slichot, the sound of the sound of the shofar, the sound of the tshuva. Tshuva comes with a sound, with a cry. That reaches the 5th dimension, Beis Paro, into the house of Paro. Beis of the house, the spiruya viskalim and ekol nahirin. And where does it fit in the word Paro? Paro comes from the word. It reveals from there. It opens up from there. Paro malashon, it's spiruya. It's revealed from there. All lights come from there, the Zohar says. Shalahimshich misham, in order to draw from there, nishma, the voice is heard. Which voice? Kala pnima, the deepest voice of the neshama, the tshuva of tshuva. Tshuva is the cry from the soul. This is the idea of ani ledodi. Kitchila amar Dodi Li shuayde matan Torah. First he says Dodi Li, that happens through the giving of the Torah. And this makes us great. We become to him Gadol Talmud Lidei Maaseh. The Talmud is great. It brings to action. Bittul Torah, but through the structure, through not learning Torah, God did not forgo on the not study. We kind of ruined that relationship. This causes the destruction. Then you have and that's the 2 months of Tammuz and Av. So what do we have to do next? We got to figure out a new way. That's tshuva. That's ani lidodi. The only advice is tshuva. I will turn first to God. That's through the cry of the soul. God will return to me. It's the hamshach, it's the drawing forth from the essence of the Ein Sof. That's above them both. And through this mismalim kalapigamim, and this suddenly comes, fills all the gaps that are drawn through the lack of Torah mitzvahs. That's I am to my beloved. Through Allah, the tshuva, that's the rising through tshuva. And where is it going? It's going to God's very essence. Ani Dodi all the way to Hashem. And then we draw the Dodi Li that Hashem is to us. But that's already the future revelation, Moshiach's revelation. We're there, the whole order is different. Its action is greater than Talmud and the like. L'chaim, l'chaim. This is the conclusion of the maamar.